In the 12th century, the Middle East was a battleground of giants. Seljuk sultanates, Abbasid caliphates, European crusaders, all commanded immense armies. Yet, even the great Saladin feared not enemy regiments, but a phantom force with no borders and no capital. A force whose primary weapon was the dagger. Legend, immortalized by Marco Polo, tells of the old man of the mountain who intoxicated youths with hashish in a paradise garden, transforming them into mindless killers. This was the perfect image for enemy propaganda. But how could such a sect hold entire empires in fear? Here, myth clashes with reality. To understand the assassins, one must understand their world. The 11th century saw the Islamic world fractured. The Sunni Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad and the Shiite Fatimid Caliphate in Cairo waged an irreconcilable ideological war. However, the real local power belonged to the Seljuk Turks, fervent Sunnis. Their powerful vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, viewed the Ismaili Shiites as a threat more formidable than the Crusaders. It was in this atmosphere of persecution and political chaos that secret societies began to emerge. The assassins did not appear out of nowhere. They were a product of their era. The assassins were not merely a sect of murderers. They were Nizari Ismailis, a branch of Ismailism, which in turn is a branch of Shiite Islam. Their main distinction was their belief in a living imam, a spiritual leader and direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. For them, the imam's word was absolute law, an unquestionable command. This unwavering devotion to spiritual authority, not narcotics, was the key to their self-sacrifice. They saw themselves not as murderers, but as Fidai, those who sacrifice themselves in the name of a higher will. From this boiling cauldron of intrigue emerged a figure who would change everything, Hasan-i Sabbah. He was not a fanatical mystic, but a brilliant scholar, strategist, and missionary. He was a theorist and practitioner of what today would be called hybrid warfare. He understood that in open battle, the Ismailis stood no chance against the heavy cavalry of the Seljuks. Their only path to survival was an asymmetric response. And for this war he needed an impregnable base. He found it, the fortress of Alamut, the eagle's nest. Hasan-i Sabbah was born in the Persian city of Qom, a center of Shiite scholarship. He received a brilliant classical education, mastering theology, geometry, and astronomy, as well as philosophy. Later legend links his school days with the poet Omar Khayyam and the future vizier Nizam al-Mulk. But historians consider this tale of the three companions a beautiful 19th century fabrication. Far more important is this: Hasan was not born an Ismaili. He came to this faith through a long intellectual quest. He was not a field commander, he was a grandmaster who saw the game many moves ahead. In his youth, he traveled to Cairo, the capital of the Fatimid Caliphate, to deepen his knowledge. There, he became an active missionary. A turning point came in 1094 after the caliph's death. Hasan supported his elder son Nizar as the rightful heir, but the vizier enthroned the younger brother. Nizar was executed, and his supporters were declared heretics. Thus, the Nizari branch of Ismailism was born. Hasan, miraculously escaping prison, fled Egypt. This experience taught him two lessons. One cannot trust large empires, and for survival, one needs one's own independent power. He returned to Persia with a clear mission: to create a state within a state. In 1090, Hasan captured Alamut. But he did not do so by assault. His operation resembled more of a hostile takeover. For several years, his agents secretly infiltrated the garrison and converted soldiers to their cause. When the moment arrived, the fortress commander simply discovered that no one obeyed him anymore. Hasan entered Alamut without a single casualty, coolly writing the former owner a check for 3,000 gold dinars. This was the first and clearest demonstration of his method. Not brute force, but intelligence, patience, and covert influence. Hasan and his followers did not seek to conquer the world. Their goal was to create a network of autonomous fortress sanctuaries, like Masyaf in Syria, linked by a unified doctrine. This was a state without clear territory, an archipelago of castles scattered in a sea of hostile empires. They acted as a chain of impregnable bases from which to launch targeted strikes. Alamut became their main center, from where, for 35 years until his death, Hasan, without ever leaving the fortress, governed his secret organization. Contrary to the colorful legend, Alamut was not a paradise garden, but a harsh, ascetic center, more akin to a military monastery. Hasan established the strictest rules, forbidding any luxury, including music and wine. He himself lived in a tiny room, and according to tradition, was merciless, even to his own family. He executed one son for drunkenness, another merely on suspicion of complicity in murder. The fortress's main treasure was not a valley with houris, but one of the greatest libraries of its time. Its fame was such that the Persian historian Juvaini, serving the Mongols, personally persuaded Hulagu Khan to allow him to save the most valuable manuscripts before the castle was set ablaze. The core strength of the order lay in the Fidai. These were not drugged youths, but young, educated, and physically trained individuals who had undergone years of rigorous preparation. Their program resembled that of modern special agents. They were taught not only dagger skills, but also foreign languages, court etiquette, and the theology of opposing factions. All of this allowed them to live undercover for years as merchants, monks, or palace guards. Their devotion was based on a deep faith in the righteousness of their cause and the unquestionable authority of the Imam. The main principle of the assassins was efficiency. Why lose thousands of soldiers in open battle when one vizier or general could be eliminated, paralyzing an entire army? Their operations were acts of psychological warfare. The goal was not merely to kill, but to do so publicly, audaciously, in the very heart of enemy power, to sow maximum terror. Sometimes the blade was not even necessary. Legend has it that the great Saladin, besieging their Syrian fortress of Masyaf, once awoke to find a dagger at his bedside and a note with an unmistakable threat. The siege was immediately lifted. The order had a clear hierarchy, reminiscent of modern intelligence agencies. At the pinnacle stood the Grand Master in Alamut. Below him were the senior missionaries, the Da'i, responsible for entire regions. Next came the ordinary preachers, recruiters, and at the lowest level, the executors, the Fidai. This strict structure ensured iron discipline and total secrecy. But Alamut was not only a military base, it was a medieval scientific center. The Nizari were renowned as astronomers, physicians, and engineers. They created a unique water supply system that allowed them to withstand sieges lasting many years, and they conducted advanced astronomical observations. For a time, the great scholar Nasir al-Din al-Tusi lived and worked in the fortress. Their intellect was as much a weapon as the dagger. It allowed them to analyze complex political situations and make decisions that baffled the rulers of mighty empires. In 1092, the assassins announced themselves to the world. On October 14th, Their first iconic victim was Nizam al-Mulk, the all-powerful vizier of the Seljuk Empire and their chief enemy. This was a shocking act that changed the rules of the game. A Fidai named Bu Tahir Arani, disguised as a Sufi mystic, approached the vizier's palanquin and delivered a fatal blow in front of his entire retinue. The effect was stunning. Just a month later, Sultan Malik Shah himself died, and the empire plunged into the chaos of civil war. This allowed Hassan's state to survive and strengthen. The assassins showed that no one, not even the most guarded man in the world, was safe. They almost never used poison or bows. Their signature weapon was the dagger. The choice of weapon was deeply symbolic. Poison was cowardly and anonymous. A bow was a long-range weapon. The dagger, however, required maximum proximity, bravery, and made the act of killing personal and undeniable. They always struck in the most crowded places, in the palace, in the mosque, during Friday prayer, in the marketplace. The goal was not merely to eliminate the enemy, but to stage a public execution, to sow terror. The Fidai usually did not attempt to escape, accepting martyrdom on the spot. This made them even more terrifying in the eyes of their enemies. When the Crusaders arrived in the Holy Land, they encountered the Syrian branch of the order from the fortress of Masyaf. It was led by the charismatic Rashid ad-Din Sinan, known to Europeans as the Old Man of the Mountain. To demonstrate the absolute obedience of his men, Sinan, according to legend, commanded 2 of his warriors to jump from the castle wall in front of a Crusader envoy. They did so immediately and without hesitation. The Crusaders, accustomed to open battles, were horrified by these invisible enemies. It was from them that stories of the assassins, full of fear and admiration, reached Europe. The most famous European assassination by the assassins was the elimination of Conrad of Montferrat, the newly elected king of Jerusalem, in 1192. 2 Fidai, who had lived in the city of Tyre for months disguised as Christian monks, stabbed him on a crowded street. This event spawned a multitude of theories. Some blamed Conrad's political rival, Richard the Lionheart. Others blamed Saladin. This story suggests that the assassins might have also acted as a mercenary force, offering their unique services to whoever was willing to pay for them. The assassins were masters of geopolitics. It is important to understand that their primary enemies were almost always Sunni Muslims, whom they considered political and religious usurpers. The Crusaders, on the other hand, were often situational allies. It is known that the Syrian Nizari formed temporary alliances, even with the Knights Templar. Their goal was a balance of power, preventing any single side from becoming powerful enough to destroy them. Their dagger was not so much a weapon of conquest as a surgical instrument for maintaining this fragile equilibrium, which ensured their survival. But where did the word assassin itself come from? Its origins trace back to the Arabic term hashishiya. But did this mean hashish users? Most modern historians, such as Bernard Lewis, consider it a derogatory nickname given to them by their enemies. It was a medieval political label, equivalent to modern terms like scum or radicals. It meant not drug addict, but rabble, people of low repute. It was part of a propaganda war aimed at discrediting the Nizari in the eyes of the rest of the Islamic world. The main architect of the myth of the Paradise Garden and drugged killers was the Venetian merchant Marco Polo. But there's a problem with his account. It's a historical anecdote, not an eyewitness testimony. He traveled through Persia in 1273, 17 years after the Mongols razed Alamut to the ground in 1256. He never saw the fortress or any living Persian Nizari. He merely recounted local legends and rumors he heard from their enemies, and his incredibly popular book cemented this myth in the European consciousness. The story of a garden where youths are plied with wine and drugs in the company of beautiful maidens, and then promised to return there after death. This is not a unique tale. It was a wandering motif, a standard literary device for demonizing an enemy. Similar stories were told about other heretical sects. Furthermore, the very geography of Alamut, a high mountain arid fortress, makes the existence of such a paradise garden physically impossible. In none of the surviving Ismaili texts is there even a hint of such a practice. It was effective slander. Aside from Marco Polo, the main sources of information about the assassins are the works of their bitterest enemies, Sunni historians such as Atta Malik Juvaini. He wrote his History of the World Conqueror under the patronage of the Mongols, who destroyed Alamut. Trying to understand the assassins through these texts is like studying the history of the United States by reading only British newspapers from 1776. We see the history of the Nizari almost exclusively through the eyes of those who hated and destroyed them. In the mid-13th century, a force that could not be stopped by a single dagger descended upon the Middle East, the Mongol Empire. The pretext for the invasion may have been a daring but failed attempt by the assassins to kill Great Khan Munka in the empire's capital, Karakorum. In response, his brother, Hulagu Khan, received orders to destroy the last two obstacles in his path: the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad and the Nizari Ismaili state in Persia. Against hundreds of thousands of Mongol warriors and Chinese siege engineers with their trebuchets, the tactic of targeted strikes was powerless. In December 1256, Hulagu's vast army besieged Alamut. Despite the formidable fortifications, the last young and inexperienced ruler of the fortress, Rukn al-Din Khurshah, realizing the hopelessness of resistance, surrendered to save the lives of his people. The Mongols used him to force the surrender of other fortresses, and then, when he was no longer needed, killed him along with his entire family. The fortress, which had been an impregnable Nizari stronghold for 166 years, was razed to the ground. This was the end of the assassin state in Persia. But the greatest tragedy of Alamut's fall was the destruction of its famous library. The Mongols, by Hulagu's order, burned priceless Nizari archives, chronicles, and theological works. This was a deliberate destruction of memory, a form of cultural genocide. Along with the books, their version of history was also burned. The truth of the assassins, told by themselves, was lost. Only myths created by their enemies remained. And it was not until the 20th century that scholars managed to find surviving manuscripts and begin to reconstruct the real picture. So, who were they really? Not drugged fanatics of legend, but highly rational political players. A persecuted religious minority that, for survival, created a unique state that lasted longer than the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem. Their true weapons were not drugs, but ideology, impeccable intelligence, angelic patience, and a willingness to self-sacrifice in the name of their faith. Their methods were centuries ahead of their time. The use of deeply undercover agents, targeted assassinations to achieve political goals, psychological pressure as a primary tool. All of this would only become standard for intelligence agencies in the 20th century. The best proof of their influence is language itself. The word assassin entered French, English, Italian, and other languages as a common noun for a contract killer. Few groups in history have left such a deep, and terrifying mark. They proved that a small but highly motivated and organized community can stand against vast empires. After the Mongol devastation, the Nizari survived as a peaceful community. Today, their spiritual leader, the 49th Imam, is Prince Karim Aga Khan IV, and their followers are known worldwide for their philanthropic and educational activities. But their militant image has forever entered Western culture. From The Count of Monte Cristo to the Assassin's Creed video game series, the myth of the assassins continues to live on, fueling our imagination with stories of secret war and the struggle of the individual against the system. The main lesson from the history of the assassins is the power of narrative. While masters of psychological warfare, they ultimately lost the war for their own story. Their image was created by their enemies and romanticized by Europeans. There's an African proverb, "Until lions have their own historians, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." The real, complex, and tragic history of the Nizari was buried beneath the ruins of Alamut, an eternal reminder that history is indeed written by the victors.